Well, that particular video is called Grace. We're actually going to talk about forgiveness today, but obviously grace and forgiveness are very closely intertwined, and so we decided to use that Skit Guys video to make that happen. Super powerful illustration. I love the phrase, take the unforgivable and make it forgivable. Maybe you have been in a place where Peter was, maybe not the exact same circumstances. Obviously, you weren't there with Jesus, but maybe you've had this moment where you're feeling so down and so bad, so unworthy of forgiveness, so unworthy of love. Last week at the Easter service, Tracy talked a little bit about Peter. We all are pretty hard on Peter, aren't we? Peter's like an easy disciple. If you know the Bible at all and you know the story of Peter's life, it's pretty easy to get down on Peter at times. Peter's like this super passionate guy who has trouble controlling his emotions and his words. Those emotions would probably do him well at different times in his life, but there were times when they caused some serious heartache for him as well. And so I don't know, maybe you're a little bit like Peter. Maybe you can identify with Peter and you can understand the feelings that he may have been having at that point. Before I jump too far, though, into what I want to talk to you about today, I want to give you just a moment to make sure that you're able to follow along with us. If you're a regular here at Five Rivers Church and you use the church app, you can follow along through the church app. If you're not a regular attender and you don't use YouVersion, if you're a YouVersion user, you can find us in the events section of YouVersion. But you can also scan this QR code up on the screen here. You can just snap a picture of it with your phone. It should, if our technology is working today, it should take you right to the YouVersion event, and you can follow along. You can read the scriptures. There's a couple of notes in there. It's interesting, while I was sitting there listening to Scott talk about communion, I had this moment where I don't know, listen, I don't want to sound too ethereal and spiritual and stuff here, because I know that sometimes that's weird for people, but I was sitting back there and I was like, I felt like all these things are running through my head, and I'm like, I have this whole sermon planned, God, right? Like, I planned this whole thing out. I put notes in. I spent time on it. And I'm sitting back there, and it's almost like I'm trying to figure out if God's telling me to say something different than what I came up here intending to say. And so I'm really, as I sit here looking at my notes, I just want you to know, I'm really struggling to even know what to say to you right now. Man, follow the Spirit. I know, that seems so easy, doesn't it? It sounds so easy. So I just have to tell you a funny thing. We're sitting in our huddle this morning. Where's Scott? Is he out in the lobby? Does anybody know if Scott's out in the lobby? So we're in our huddle, and Scott says, it wouldn't be terrible if we got out early today. Right? Because it's like 80, it's going to be 82 degrees. Some of you are probably thinking, I got stuff to do when I get home. And so I'm sitting here thinking, if I listen to the Spirit, I might talk longer. And so I don't know what to do. I guess I'm going to do this. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to depart from my notes for just a second. Because while we were singing How He Loves, I just can't escape. I can't get away from this idea of how much God loves each and every one of us. I've grown up, I've been raised my whole life in the church. I rebelled against the church when I was a teenager because I had such a distorted view and understanding of God as a father. And over the course of the last number of months, I've been listening to this podcast, and I have picked up some stuff in that podcast that has kind of really challenged me in how I see myself in terms of how God may see me. And, as we were singing that song, I kept thinking about how much does God love me, and all I could think about, man, this is so hard today. all I could think about was how much I love my two kids, right? And, man, you know, if you're a parent, if you've ever had children, you have these moments, right, where you cannot understand your kids. Okay, y'all with me? And your kids don't understand you, right? And there are times where you don't agree, right? Especially when your kids become teenagers, and in my case now, they're both adults. My daughter just turned 18 a few weeks ago, and she's an adult. And so I have two adult children. And we don't always agree, right? We don't always agree. But no matter how much we disagree, no matter how many times my kids may make a choice or a decision that I wouldn't, or that I question, or whatever, you know how much it affects my love for them? It doesn't. And I'm not sitting up here to try and tell you that, oh, you know, God doesn't see any bad in the world or anything like that. I'm not, please don't hear me saying that. But man, I am overcome today with the idea, and sometimes this happens to me, that God can love me the way that he does because I don't deserve it, right? Sometimes my kids and I will have conversations, and I'll be like, how in the world can you possibly think that way? Right? I mean, come on. And they look at me and they think the exact same way. We all do this, right? You have conversations with people and you look at them and you think, how can a, educated adult person think that way? You all have these thoughts about people sometimes, right? We all do. Okay, it's okay. It's okay, right? But man, and then I think to myself, I wonder how often God looks down on me and thinks to himself, how in the world do you think that way? You know what I'm saying? I know it's true. I know it happens. So listen, today, as we finish up our I Am series, the idea is to talk about forgiveness. That's what we had planned to talk about today. And so we showed this little video, right, where God says to Peter, I take the unforgivable and make it forgivable. Everybody knows, if you know the story of Peter, you probably are real familiar with that conversation, where Jesus says to Peter, hey, if you love me, feed my sheep. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go into all that. There's a lot packed into that I don't have time to go into. That's not even the conversation I want to talk to you about this morning. Okay? I want to talk to you about another conversation that Jesus and Peter had about forgiveness. And this particular conversation is found in the book of Matthew, chapter 18. Matthew chapter 18. We're going to read verses 21 through 35. Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 through 35. And in this passage, Peter, who, as we all have already talked about, Peter is well known for his passionate feelings, responses, and his ability to put his foot in his mouth all the time, right? So Peter, in Matthew 18, verse 21, comes to Jesus. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? And then he asks this question, up to 7 times? Now, you may or may not be familiar with this, but according to Jewish tradition, it was common among rabbinical teaching. Wow. It was common among rabbinical teaching that you should forgive someone 3 times for an offense. After the 3rd time, no mas, right? No more forgiveness, that's all you get. 3 times. Now, this is according to rabbinic tradition. Peter comes to Jesus, because we all know how Peter is. He says, Jesus, how many times should I forgive my brother who sins against me? And how many times does he ask? Up to 7 times? No doubt Peter is thinking, you know what? I'm extra special. I'm going to double it, And just for measure, I'm going to round one more to make it the perfect number 7. Surely Jesus is going to be overcome by my gratitude and my willingness to extend immeasurable forgiveness compared to everybody else. Jesus, how many times should I forgive my brother? Thinking, no doubt, that Jesus is going to pat him on the back. You go, Peter. Jesus answered, I tell you not 7 times, but 77. Now, some translations would use 70 times 7. Some say 77. Let's think of it this way. How many more is 77 than 7? It's a lot. It's 70 more. Wow, I'm going to have to stand up. It's like 70 more times. Now, if you go the 70 times 7 route, well, then we're way more, right? But either way, we are multiples ahead of 7, yes? So we could have this lengthy argument about whether it was 490 or whether it was 77. The point is, it's way more than what Peter thinks it is. Oh, my goodness gracious. I don't know, dude. It's not his fault. Like, I think we hear these popping sounds. We're like, what's that sound guy doing up there? It's my son. So, you know how we talked earlier about that, right? Hopefully it doesn't do that again. So Jesus is like 70 times 7 or 77 times. Peter, no doubt at this point, is like, dude, come on, Jesus. I mean, seriously. Like, what are you saying right now? And so here it goes on. Now, Jesus then goes on and he tells this parable. And the parable goes like this. Therefore, Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle his accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Now, I want you to stop and think about something. Let's say you're a king, and you have a servant, and you loaned him 10,000 bags of gold. First of all, what is wrong with you that you would loan a servant 10,000 bags of gold? I mean, let's think about this, right? Seriously. This is very hyperbolic, right? I mean, I think sometimes we think, oh gosh, this guy literally owed his master 10,000 bags of gold. Probably not, because a reasonable master would never loan 10,000 bags of gold to a servant who could never pay it back. But that's not the point. The point is Jesus is trying to say there's an enormous amount of debt that this guy is probably never going to be repossession, is it not? Right? That's not just the car and the house, folks. That's all of it. And it probably still wouldn't have been enough to pay back the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him and said, "Be patient with me," he begged, "and I will pay back everything." Really? Right? I'll pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him. Listen to what it says. Canceled the debt and let him go. 10,000 bags of gold. Canceled the debt and let him go. Now, that's pretty incredible, is it not? How might you feel if you had just been forgiven a 10,000 bag of gold debt? Your family has been, how would you feel? You'd feel great, wouldn't you? Hopefully you would not do this. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. Now let's think about that for just a second. Oh, man. I don't know. I told you the sound gremlins, man. Okay. Working. Okay. We just try this. Let's just do it this way. So he owes him 100 silver coins compared to 10,000 bags of gold. He grabbed him and began to choke him. "Pay back what you owe me," he demanded. His servant fell to his knees and begged him. Does this sound familiar? Yeah. Be patient with me, and I'll pay it back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. Man, like, what isn't wrong with that? Right? I mean, can you find anything that isn't wrong with that? When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged, and they went and told their master what had happened. Then the master called the servant in. "You wicked servant," he said, "I canceled all that debt of yours." Why? Why did he forgive it? Because you begged me to. Because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had on you? In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured. Now, originally it was just that he was going to be sold. Now he's going to be tortured until he should pay back all that he owed. Now, I don't know about y'all, but how much do you get paid for being tortured? Do any of you get paid for being tortured? Last I checked, there's not much money in that. So I'm not sure how this master thought that by torturing his servant, he was going to be able to pay him back. And I think you all are following that, right? Because the point is, there's no way the servant is ever going to be able to pay back the debt. Then he says this, and this is the hardest part probably of the whole thing. "This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart." Now, Peter goes to Jesus and says, "Jesus, how many times should I forgive? 7?" And Jesus says, no. How about way more than that? And then he tells a story about canceling debt. How strange is that? It's really not strange at all if you understand that the idea here is that each and every one of us owes a debt we cannot pay. Y'all follow that? And this is where I'm going to break from my notes. I don't even know if I'm going to say anything I have written down here. Who knows? We all owe a debt that's like 10,000 bags of gold. And it would behoove us, when we are wronged by other people, to forgive them. Because we are forgiven so much more than what they have done against us. Now, I'm not saying that, well, Brian, you just don't know how I have been harmed and hurt by people. I'm not claiming to, right? And I guess, you know what? I am going to read some of what I had in my notes because I think that maybe it's important. Because sometimes we hear forgiveness and we start thinking about judgment and we start thinking about things like justice, right? How many of you are interested in justice in here? We got any justice people? Nobody cares about justice. Come on, y'all. I know better. Good night. Justice and fairness, right? Come on. This is America. Act like y'all don't care about justice. What? Good night. Pastor's up there talking, I got to put on my best behavior, pretend. We care about these things. And sometimes when we hear the word forgiveness, we start thinking, well, if I forgive someone, then I'm not making sure justice happens. And so here's what I would like you to hear. I would like you to hear this. Forgiveness is not the kind of thing where we act like nothing happened. Forgiveness acknowledges that there was a wrong committed. Because you don't have to forgive someone if there was nothing to be forgiven of, yes? Yes? Maybe some of you are sitting there thinking, well, but somebody hurt me really bad and they never said they were sorry. They never apologized. They never asked for forgiveness. Well, okay. But you forgiving them should not be based on whether or not they come and ask you to do that. I know some of you are like, no, listen, dude, that's crazy talk, right? I want you to understand that forgiving someone is not pretending or acting as if nothing ever happened. That you have to say things like, oh, it's okay, or no big deal, just forget about it. Right? That's not what we're saying.
We're also not saying that when you forgive someone, you have to go right back and put yourself in a place where they do that to you again. There are some safeguards and things you can put into your life. But church, we're talking today about forgiveness. Talking about forgiveness. Forgiveness acknowledges that a wrong was committed. Some of you may be sitting here thinking, yeah, but man, if I forgive someone, then I just live like a victim my whole life. Right? I'm just a victim my whole life. If I just walk around and forgive everybody for all the things they do to me, I would challenge you that forgiveness also changes your status from victim to victor. Now you may be thinking, well, but if I just forgive them, then they still have power over me. No. No. Maybe you have lived your life in a way where you haven't been able to forgive someone of something. And maybe you can relate to the idea of being prisoner to your anger, prisoner to your bitterness, being held captive by your resentment. If you can forgive, you can change your status from victim to victor. But there's something else, too, that I want you to understand about forgiveness. You see, forgiveness makes really good sense for people who have needed it in the past, need it in the present, or will need it in the future from somebody else. Right? Yeah. You see, here's the thing about forgiveness. Forgiveness is something that you're going to have to give to people at some point, and it's something you're going to need someone to give to you. And not just God, folks, okay? Like, I don't care how good you are. I just don't care, right? I don't care how spiritual or religious. I don't care how much you read your Bible. I don't care how much you pray. I don't care how much any of those things. You are going to, at some point in time, do something you're going to need to be forgiven for. You just are. Because we're not perfect people, right? I mean, listen, I got to tell you, there are times where I walk around in this church and I feel like, man, I make some really good decisions. I know some of you are like, did he say that out loud? I did. But can I tell you how many times I walk around this place and feel like, man, that was a really poor decision. I just hurt somebody. The way I handled that situation was hurtful. The way I handled that caused harm. I need to be forgiven for what I did, even if I didn't mean to do it. I got to pick on my daughter just because I can. I love that child, right? Sitting right over there. I can't tell you how many times my daughter has said to me, that's not my fault. Right? I'll be like, girl, like, what, blah, blah. She'll be like, that's not my fault. Like, I didn't tell you to do this, or I didn't tell you, that's not my fault. I'm like, well, whose fault is it? I don't know. I just know it's not my fault. And there are times I'm like, this created heartache for me. And what I really want is just, even if it wasn't her fault, I just want her to be like, oh, Dad, I'm sorry. But sometimes all I get is, it's not my fault. Right? Now, she knows how much I love her, and But there are these moments where I'm like, I don't care whose fault it is. This was hurtful, and I'm like bummed about it. So all I really want to hear from you is, even if you don't feel like you did anything wrong or whatever, just say you're sorry. And here's the thing, I probably apologize more than I need to. I probably apologize and ask for forgiveness more than I probably need to at times, because I want to make sure people know that I'm forgiving you, even if you don't feel like you did anything to me. And I have had to go to people, even when I didn't feel like I did anything wrong, and ask for their forgiveness for harming them. Right? Y'all ever been in that place? Yeah. Here's another thing. Church forgiveness leads to freedom. You can be hurt and you can be harmed by someone. And I'm going to tell you right now, there's no doubt that forgiveness can be risky, right? Yes? Because true forgiveness means that you're making a personal commitment to release someone from something that they have done to you. You're setting aside an act or an action, and you're letting go of it. You're willing to set it aside and not bring it up anymore, and not make them pay for it over and over and over again. In a marriage relationship, your spouse does something to hurt or harm you. They ask for your forgiveness, and you say, you are forgiven. Guess what that means? Oh, I know. That means 2 weeks later, you don't bring it up again. Right? Some of you are like, oh, no, that is not true at all. That's totally not true. Because they did something different that kind of like mirrors that and is connected to it. And so because the two are connected, I have to bring it back up. That's not what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is like I'm setting it aside and remembering it no more. I'm willing to cast it aside. That, again, that doesn't mean that you just let somebody like abuse you or things like that. We're not talking about that. We're talking about forgiveness, setting aside the action so that you and your spirit, in your heart and in your mind can be free. There are some quotes I want to share with you really quick right now. Lewis Smedes says this: the question is not whether forgiving is dangerous. It's about whether or not it's the safe bet. It almost always comes down to where we get the best odds. Forgiving is risky, but the risk is worth taking. Now, I wouldn't disagree with that necessarily, but there's a quote I like much better, and it is from Anne Lamott in a book called Traveling Mercies. She says, not forgiving someone is like drinking rat poison and then waiting for the rat to die. So when you refuse to forgive someone, it's like you're committing yourself to becoming resentful and angry and bitter. And that's not what we want. Now, I'm not standing up here pretending that forgiveness is easy, folks. I don't want you to hear that, because I don't think it is. And if you're someone who's here today and you're like, you know what? I'm not really sure how I feel about this whole church thing, this God thing, this Jesus thing. I'm here because like somebody asked me to come, or I'm here because I feel like it's the right thing to do, but I'm not totally in on all this. And if that's you today, listen, we're glad you're here. And I hope that maybe something you've heard about forgiveness will be helpful to you in your everyday life. I really do. I think this is really practical stuff that we've talked about thus far, but for just a second, I want to make sure that I clearly communicate that if you're here and you're someone who follows Jesus and you say, I am a sold-out follower of Christ, I have one more point that I want to share with you, and that is that forgiveness is not Jesus' suggestion. It's his command. You see, like, if you're a Jesus follower and you're someone who says, yes, I want to live my life for Jesus, this is not optional for you. This is not like something that we're like, oh, yeah, that would be cool if I could do that. If you're committed to Jesus, you don't have an option. You just simply forgive. Now, some of you are like, well, I can't figure out how to do that. Well, pray about it. Put yourself at the feet of Jesus and say, God, how do I do this? You see, at Five Rivers Church, as I close, and I'm only a few minutes late, oh well. As we close, at Five Rivers Church, we like to say this: we are a place where we want to live, love, and lead like what? Oh, say that one more time. One more time. Live, love, and lead like Jesus. Now, in order to live like Jesus, to love like Jesus, to lead like Jesus, do we have to emulate Jesus? The correct answer is yes, Ryan, thank you. Just kidding. Yes! We have to emulate as much as we can Jesus. Jesus is the ultimate embodiment of forgiveness. I mean, if you can find a better example of ultimate forgiveness, then I would love to see it. And so, because Jesus is the ultimate embodiment of forgiveness, we should strive to be people who are forgiving. People who are willing to forgive. If you want to live like Jesus, you want to love like Jesus, and you want to lead like Jesus, then you have to try to forgive like Jesus. Now, are you going to be able to do that, especially in your imperfect humanity? No. No, you're not. Does that mean that you shouldn't strive for it? Of course not. Right? Of course not. My hope today as I close is that if you're here today and you are struggling with forgiving someone for something, and you're in this place where you feel better because you're just holding it against them, and every time you see them, you're like, ooh. Every time their name comes up, you want to turn to the person next to you and be like, oh. Oh, come on, folks, right? Yeah? Every time something happens and your blood starts boiling, your face turns red, you're just like, ooh, if I hear that name one more time. I'm going to tell you something. You probably need to be thinking about forgiveness. Right? Because the last question I want to ask you is this one. How much can you love someone when you cannot forgive them? Can love exist in your heart with all the anger, with all the bitterness, and all the resentment? Can those two things truly coexist? They can't, can they? You can't love that person if every time you hear their name, you're like, ooh, let me tell you what they did, or let me tell blah, 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 blah. Hey, church, we live, love, and lead like Jesus. I'm not asking you to put yourself in a place where the person can hurt you over and over and over and over again. But I am encouraging and imploring you to release them. Forgive them. And move ahead with your life so that you can live, love, and lead like Jesus. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, Lord, my prayer today is that if there is someone here in person, if someone is listening to us online from another place, God, if people are struggling to forgive, Lord, may they see that you are the ultimate forgiver. And that we want to live lives as Christ followers that emulate you. And so, God, if there's someone here who's struggling, Lord, I pray that they would place themselves at your feet, that they would ask for your strength, that they would ask for your grace to be able to forgive in the way they need to forgive for whatever it is that has been done against them. May we be people who are willing to forgive. We ask all of this in your name today.